Induction cooktops have become the gold standard in almost every single new build now, especially in Europe. But for some reason, the RV industry in both Europe and North America continues to insist on using propane. So why is that? Is induction just useless for campers? Or is there some big conspiracy amongst big RV that we just don't know about? Well, I can't tell you about the conspiracy theory because I don't even know if it is one, but I can tell you about using induction cooktops in a van. We've lived in this camper here for the last 2 years, and we've used this induction cooktop for the whole time. In this video, I am going to be talking about what it's like to use an induction cooktop in a van. So join me as I make myself a little cup of afternoon/evening tea, and we'll go over the benefits and the big cons as well of using an induction cooktop in your camper. Perhaps the biggest benefit of using an induction cooktop in your van is that it's a key step to making your camper completely propane free, and as a result, that much safer. Considering that the RV industry considers propane to be the bee's knees, using it for seemingly everything they can, you might be wondering why it's so important to be propane free. The problem comes with your connections. The problems with connections, especially when you're in a moving earthquake, which really is what a tiny house on wheels or camper is. These connections are gonna rattle loose at some point. What this means is that over time, there is a risk that you could develop a small propane leak from one of these connections. Obviously, the more propane appliances you have, the greater the chance of a leak happening. And what happens is that this leak will just build up over time because gas is heavier than air. So all the gas ends up sitting at the bottom of your RV. Now, if you've ever used a manual gas cooktop where you have to kind of press it down to release the gas before then lighting it, well, you've probably noticed that if you held the gas for too long, you get a big woof when you light it. And well, on a gas cooktop, you might singe your eyebrows or your knuckles a little bit. But in an RV, if you've had a propane leak for a while, well, you're not singeing your eyebrows, you're exploding your RV. Now, if there is such a safety risk with using propane, you might be wondering why the RV industry continues to focus on using it. Well, honestly, the answer comes down to money. And as we'll go over in the cons of induction, using an induction cooktop does require a bigger power system. In this day and age, almost every single appliance that traditionally used propane in a traditional factory-built RV or camper can actually be replaced by a 100% electrical alternative. But the last step is cooking. How are you going to cook without gas? Well, until the advent of induction, and especially kind of more compact induction cooktops like this one, there wasn't really a good alternative. But with induction, that final piece of the puzzle has been solved. If you want more tips on how to challenge the thinking of the traditional RV industry, then make sure you subscribe to our channel, as we will be posting a lot of videos that can help make your camper both safer and healthier. The first pro, which you'll kind of see here as I turn it on, is that you get heat instantly. Now I've got it set to boil, and the heat, it starts off instantly. That's a huge benefit. It's kind of like a gas cooktop in that sense, you know, as soon as you turn the knob, boom, you've got heat. As soon as you turn it down, the heat goes down. So induction cooktops are extremely responsive. They're absolutely nothing like the old electric stoves that you might remember from crappy rental apartments or honestly, even nice rental places sometimes. Obviously, the other big pro of an induction cooktop heating up quickly is that you can get your morning coffee that much quicker. Now, I'm a bit of a gremlin in the morning until I've had my morning cup of coffee, just ask my wife. So being able to get my coffee that much faster is a huge benefit. Another big benefit of induction cooktops is that because they rely on an electromagnetic field, it only works as long as the cookware is actually on the stove. Right now I'm boiling the water, but as soon as I take it off, you can kind of hear that it shuts off, and I can get my hand here and it's not burning. Now if I put the kettle back on here, it should just automatically start up again as soon as it senses the magnetism. Now, beyond just the convenience of that, the other big benefit of it kind of sensing whether or not there's actually cookware on the cooking plate is that it means that it's safe for both children and cats. Now, I say cats because when we had our cats, we just had no chance of keeping them off the counters. We tried for a couple of years and the cats won out in the end. But so this way, if you're using induction, you don't have to worry about children or cats burning themselves, because as soon as you take off the cookware, there's no more source of heat. The other big benefit of that is that you can't accidentally leave the cooktop on. So for example, with a gas stove, if you just take off your pot, let's say, you say, okay, well, my tea is ready, so I'm going to pour it, but you forget to turn it off. Well, on a gas stove, you now have a naked flame. And that's a bit of a safety concern, not to mention it's not great for your health because it's just producing carbon dioxide. But with an induction cooktop, if I now just leave this off permanently, it'll eventually just shut itself off. And once again, I put it back and it'll start by itself. The other benefit of induction versus a gas cooktop is that induction cooktops have this really nice, flat, easy to clean glass surface. That means that all you have to do is just wipe it and boom, you're done. That's it. You've cleaned it. It's that easy. Whenever I've had to deal with gas cooktops in a rental property or an Airbnb, it's always been an absolute pain because they have a big grate that you have to take off that somehow has to fit in the sink. And then they always have a lip so that the grates don't go flying. But the problem is that lip makes it really, really hard to clean. Another benefit of induction and absolutely versus gas is that there's no combustion happening here. This runs off electricity, there's no open flame, and that means there's no carbon dioxide. Because we're propane free in this van, we also don't have to worry about any gas leaks or anything like that. So we don't need a gas detector, we don't need a carbon dioxide detector, because there's really no way to produce carbon dioxide with this induction cooktop. And that's really nice. The other benefit of that is that it means you don't need a specialized hood vent and a huge hole in the side of your van. Obviously, if you're cooking, you're probably going to want to vent it anyway because, well, as you can see right now, we obviously have a lot of steam. But you don't have to vent just for the sake of not poisoning yourself. Okay, well, it looks like my water is finished boiling. That was really quick, and that's the huge advantage of induction. It is that quick. So I'm going to turn it off now and start pouring myself a little cup. Ow! And start pouring myself a little cup of tea if I can do it without burning myself. Now that we know what the general benefits of induction are, let's talk about how induction can benefit you in your van. Because induction cooktops only rely on electricity, that means that you never have to rely on an outside source. Well, as long as you have enough battery power or if the sun is shining enough. So, for example, in our van, at least in the summer, we could honestly run this induction cooktop for an unlimited period of time. The big benefit is that you don't need a gas bulb. That's a massive benefit, especially if you plan on camping internationally. At least here in Europe, almost every single country uses a bottle system, and they are very rarely interchangeable. So unless you want to end up with a van full of empty gas bottles, then, well, gas is just a pain in the behind. With a gas cooktop, although it doesn't use a huge amount of gas, it absolutely obviously does consume some. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere enjoying nature and you run out of gas, well, there's not really a way to replenish that supply without having to go back into town, which could be a good few hours drive. With an induction cooktop, as long as you can either drive and charge your batteries from your DC-DC charger, or if you're lucky enough to have really good weather, well, you can cook for an unlimited amount of time and you never have to heat your nature spot. Before I move on to the cons, I alluded to this a little bit before, but I do want to reiterate that an induction cooktop is absolutely nothing like the crappy electric stoves that you might have known before. They use a completely different technology, although they do obviously both use electricity. On a cheaper, regular electric stove, you're relying on radiant heat. On the really cheap ones, it's literally a metal coil that you can see, and you can see it becoming literally red hot. On the nicer ones, they'll basically just put those metal coils underneath a nice piece of glass, and it can actually look like an induction cooktop, but it's still relying on the same basic concept, and that concept is radiant heat. Whereas, as I said before, on an induction cooktop, we're using an electromagnetic field that only heats up the cookware. And this means that no other surface becomes hot, except obviously, for whatever's left over from it. But as you can see, I just boiled a kettle and I can put my hand here and I'm not screaming in pain. All right, before you go out and rush off to buy an induction cooktop after hearing all these big pros about using induction, there are a couple of cons that you need to know about, and some of these could very well be deal breakers. The first major con, especially if you're in a country that uses a 120-volt power supply, is that there are no major manufacturers that make an induction cooktop for 120 volts. That means you're going to be stuck buying something off of Amazon or some no-name brand. Now, sometimes that can work out really well for you, and sometimes the quality is great, and sometimes you even trust their reviews on Amazon. But as we all know, that is absolutely not an ironclad guarantee. The other big problem with the 120 volts is that it just isn't enough power. And because I just said doesn't have enough power, I have to make a Star Trek reference, and it's going to be really bad. I just don't have the power. All right, that was my really bad Star Trek impression. But the point still remains. 120 volts isn't enough. Most cooktops that I was able to find on Amazon are only rated at a maximum of 1800 watts if they're using 120 volts. Now, 1800 watts divided over 2 burners, kind of like this one is, that's only 900 watts per burner. And that just is not enough power to do any real form of cooking. You could maybe simmer some pasta sauce, but that's about it. So the solution to that is to stick to a single burner, and then you can use the whole 1800 watts, which realistically is probably completely fine for van life. Even though we have a dual burner in this one, and my wife is an excellent cook, we still really only use one of the elements probably 80 to 90% of the time. So sticking with a single burner wouldn't be the biggest compromise in the world. If you're lucky enough to live in a country that has a 230 volt power supply, well, you're going to get more than enough power for your induction cooktop, but it actually leads to a whole another set of problems. And that problem is that it's actually too much power. So, for example, this cooktop right here is rated for 3500 watts. Well, that's fantastic for cooking, and that's not that much for a house, but in a camper, our inverter can't actually handle it, and that's even though it's a really nice Victron Multiplus 3000 VA model, but that's still limited to about 2400 watts continuous power supply. There are 2 ways to get around that problem. The first solution is just to go out and buy a different inverter that can handle it, but the problem is that they kind of jump up in price a fair bit, and you're going to struggle to find one, especially in flare faults. Now, Victron does make a model that is 12 volts and 5000 VA, and that should give you more than enough continuous power to power a cooktop like this one. But if you're on a budget and you're trying to stick to some of the cheaper brands, then you might struggle to find one, especially at 12 volts. Obviously, if you jump up to a 48 volt one, you won't have any sort of issues whatsoever finding one at 5000 plus watts. The second solution to these cooktops being so power hungry on a 230 volt power supply is that if you buy a more expensive model, kind of like this one here, this is a Siemens model, and on this one and other models like it, you can actually go in and program a max power consumption. So with that, you can really set it up for the limitations of your inverter. But once again, if you're on a budget, you might not want to stretch the extra few $100 to buy a more expensive model. That's okay. In that case, you're just going to have to resort to trial and error. So basically, if you're planning on using both cooktops at the same time, or both burners at the same time, you just need to kind of learn what the max setting is. Yes, you're going to trip your inverter a few times, but as long as it's a good model, that doesn't really harm it. Now, as I said earlier, with induction, you can essentially cook for an unlimited amount of time as long as you have electricity. But the problem there is that you have to be endlessly generating electricity. And, well, in a van, there's about three solutions realistically. The first solution is solar panels, and the second solution is a DC-DC charger, and lastly, you could also plug into a campsite. The problem with solar panels is that, as the name hints at, they require sun. And if you're traveling in the northern hemisphere in the winter, even if you're in the more southern countries, in Europe, for example, Portugal and Spain, well, there's still going to be a lot of gray days, and you may not generate enough solar to be able to continuously power your cooktop. A DC-DC charger is also a great way to generate enough power to recharge your batteries after using your induction cooktop. But it requires you driving. And depending on the model of DC-DC charger that you have, it just may not do enough with the amount of driving you want to do. For example, in our van, we have the Victron DC-DC 30 amp model, which does a great job and it works flawlessly. But 30 amps per hour of driving is just not enough to compensate for what the induction cooktop is using. Now, the solution to those two problems is, well, number one, you can add more solar panels, but on this van, we've absolutely maxed out our roof space with a 550 watt panel. And for DC-DC charging, well, again, you're gonna reach a certain max. Right now, Victron makes a 50 amp model for both 12 and 24 volts, which is great, but that is also pushing the capabilities of most vehicle alternators. The last solution is obviously to go to a campsite, but if you're anything like us, then the whole point of van life is not just to go to a regular campsite. Another, albeit small, con of using an induction cooktop is that you have to use specific cookware. Now, we mentioned earlier that induction uses an electromagnetic field. If you paid a small bit of attention in school, you'll know that not every metal is magnetic. And obviously for an induction cooktop to work, the cookware has to be magnetic. So you can use cast iron, you can use stainless steel, you can also use like a Le Creuset pot or anything else like that. That works perfectly fine. The only thing that won't work that you might have in your household is a aluminium pan, a ceramic pan, or if you might have some fancy copper pans, those will also not work on an induction cooktop. I call it a very small con because chances are that most of the cookware that you have in your kitchen drawer is going to be magnetic. And even if it's not, well, it doesn't have to cost a fortune. For example, this perfectly good stainless steel pot that we've been using for the last 4 years only cost us $15 from IKEA. So you don't have to break the bank on cookware just to use an induction cooktop. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you're in North America or any other area that uses a 120 volt power supply, you are going to be limited to sort of kind of no-name brands. So in terms of recommending something, well, it's a little bit difficult. Realistically, you're probably going to be shopping on Amazon, and that's totally okay. So I kind of went on Amazon myself just to have a look around, see what there is, see if I could find anything decent. At the end of the day, I really suspect that all the internals are pretty much the same, and they're just kind of repackaged in a slightly different way. So as a result, I really wouldn't spend a lot more for one than you absolutely have to. The one that I've recommended down below is only about $50 once you use a little coupon. And that really is about what I would spend, just because I wouldn't count on there being much of a warranty period either. Well, at least not beyond the 30-day Amazon return period. But, you know, if you're only spending $50 and the thing starts to die after just a year, well, that's okay. You know, it's not the end of the world. Now, if you're in a country that uses a 230 volt power supply, well, then you're in luck. Most of the big brands actually make sort of dual burner units like this one that you can buy for a pretty affordable price. So if you're interested in a really nice cooktop like the one we have, this is a Siemens Domino model, then take a look in the description below and we've actually linked to this exact one. As always, if you have any questions about using an induction cooktop in your van, installing it in your van, or whether or not you have the right power supply for it, or any other questions that you might have about induction, just let me know in the comments and I will absolutely get back to you. Now, I said that an induction cooktop uses a lot of power, but how much power does it actually use? Well, luckily for you guys, we have a little Victron shunt installed in our battery system, so I can actually tell you exactly how many amp hours it's going to use. So let's take a real world example. I'm going to start boiling this kettle of water right here, and then I'll show you guys on the phone how many amp hours it's actually drawing from our system. So here goes. And now it has been set to boil. Okay, now it's boiling, and let's see how much power we're actually using from our system right now. Okay, so you can kind of hear the motor powering up. We're still bringing a little bit of sun, but it's not much. And obviously we have the fridge running as well. Okay, so on my trusty little Victron app here, whoops, hang on, the water's boiling over. I can see that it was actually consuming 95 amp hours as it was boiling this small kettle of water. If you want to see how we incorporated this induction cooktop into our 144-inch Sprinter van build, then go ahead and check out our van tour video.